She bought a husband to control her daughter. But when the truth came out, the man she owned destroyed her empire without raising his voice. The mansion stood like a crown on the hill, shining with glass walls, gold railings, and quiet arrogance. From the outside, it looked like success had finally settled and built a home. But inside, something else lived there. Something louder than music and heavier than wealth. Princess walked through the sitting room as if the floor belonged only to her. Her heels clicked with confidence. Her phone pressed to her ear. Her face twisted in irritation. A maid accidentally brushed past her while carrying a tray of drinks. "Are you blind?" Princess snapped, not even looking back. The maid froze, hands shaking, eyes lowered. "I'm sorry, madam," she whispered. Princess stopped walking. Slowly, she turned. "Sorry?" She laughed, sharp and careless. "Do you know how much this carpet costs? If you spill even one drop, your whole life cannot replace it." The maid's lips trembled. Everyone in the room watched, but no one spoke. Not the guests, not the staff. Silence had learned this house very well. From the balcony above, Madame Gold observed the scene with a tired expression. She did not interrupt. She did not correct. Instead, she reached into her handbag, pulled out a stack of notes, and dropped them into the maid's shaking hands. "Go," she said calmly. "Buy yourself new confidence." The maid nodded quickly and left, swallowing her tears. Money had done its job again. Princess smiled, satisfied, and flopped onto the sofa like a queen returning to her throne. "Mama, these people are so useless," she said loudly. "Honestly, I don't know how they survive without us." Madame Gold forced a small smile and sat beside her daughter. To the world, she was powerful, admired, feared. But in that moment, she looked like a woman who had lost control of the one thing she loved too much. Outside these walls, society whispered. Parties, women smiled with tight lips. "Ah, Princess is still unmarried?" they asked sweetly. "Such a beautiful girl. Maybe too selective." Men shook their heads in private. Elders sighed. Everyone knew Princess was trouble, but nobody dared say it out loud. Madame Gold's money had a long reach, and truth does not travel far when fear blocks the road. Princess scrolled through her phone, laughing at messages, bored with a world that bent too easily for her. She had never been told no. She had never learned consequence. Every mistake had been erased with money, every insult forgiven with gifts. Why should I change when the world changes for me? Madame Gold watched her daughter and felt a strange weight press against her chest. She had bought silence for years, mistaking it for peace. She had fed entitlement and called it love. And now, standing in a mansion full of wealth, she realized something uncomfortable. Money had given her everything except a disciplined child. One question hung quietly in the air, unspoken but heavy. What happens when money can no longer fix what it created? The house returned to its usual calm, but beneath the luxury, something fragile had already cracked. Night fell softly over the mansion, but inside Madame Gold's bedroom, sleep refused to come. The room was large, elegant, and silent, yet her thoughts were louder than any noise. She stood near the window, staring at the city lights below, lights that admired her success, envied her power, and whispered about her failure as a mother. That afternoon still echoed in her ears. At a social gathering, smiles had been polite, voices sweet, but the questions had cut deep. "So, Princess is still unmarried. Such beauty, such wealth, strange, isn't it?" Madame Gold smiled through it all, nodding gracefully, but every word pressed against her pride. By the time she returned home, her chest felt tight, as if shame had followed her through the gates. She turned from the window and sat slowly on the edge of her bed. Across the hall, Princess's laughter floated freely, careless, untouched, unbothered. It angered her and comforted her at the same time. "I gave you everything," Madame Gold whispered into the empty room. "Why is it never enough?" She knew the truth, even if she had avoided it for years. Princess was not misunderstood. She was undisciplined, not unlucky, untaught. But correcting her now felt impossible. Princess had grown up, believing money was power, and power meant never changing. If I try to break her, I will lose her. The next morning, Madame Gold met with her closest advisor, a man who had solved problems for her with contracts, not conversations. She listened quietly as he spoke of alliances, image, and reputation. A husband will stabilize her, he said carefully. Someone obedient, someone who understands his place. Madame Gold's fingers tightened around her teacup. The idea settled in her mind, not as love, not as hope, but as control. Why fix a fire when you can cover it with gold? She leaned back and closed her eyes. A husband could silence the whispers. A marriage could restore respect. A man chosen by her could restrain Princess without confrontation. No therapy. No discipline. No tears. Only a transaction. That evening, she called Princess into her study. You are getting married, she announced calmly. Princess blinked, surprised, then laughed. To who? To someone suitable, Madame Gold replied. Someone I will choose. Princess shrugged, already bored. As long as he does what I say. Madame Gold nodded slowly, mistaking indifference for agreement. She did not notice how easy it had been. She did not hear the warning hidden in that careless acceptance. She turned away, her decision already made. Money would handle this problem too. It always had. But as she stood alone again, a quiet fear brushed against her heart. What if control is only another form of blindness? Madame Gold picked up her phone and made the call that would change everything. In choosing convenience over correction, she stepped onto a path she did not understand, one that led straight into her past. He arrived without noise, without pride, without the hunger most men brought into Madame Gold's presence. No expensive suit, no exaggerated confidence. Just a clean shirt, steady posture, and eyes that carried a quiet weight. When he stepped into the sitting room, the air itself seemed to slow. Madame Gold studied him carefully. She had expected hesitation, questions, bargaining. Instead, he stood calmly, hands folded, listening as if time belonged to him. She explained the offer plainly. A marriage arranged for convenience. A life of comfort. Absolute obedience. She spoke of expectations, appearances, and boundaries, outlining the arrangement like a contract rather than a union. When she finished, silence settled between them. He nodded once. I accept, he said. No curiosity. No negotiation. No visible emotion. Madame Gold blinked, slightly unsettled. You don't want to know who she is? She asked. Or what kind of woman she can be? He looked at her with respectful eyes. I have been told enough. The calmness disturbed her more than resistance ever could. Most men would have smiled too much or spoken too fast. This one did neither. His voice was low, controlled, like a man who had learned to speak only when words were necessary. This is perfect, she thought. A man who does not ask questions cannot create problems. She smiled for the first time in days. They discussed details, living arrangements, public behavior, silence in private matters. He agreed to everything without protest. With each nod, Madame Gold felt her confidence return. This man would not challenge Princess. He would absorb her storms and remain standing, or so she believed. As he rose to leave, she stopped him. Tell me, she said lightly, why are you willing to do this? He paused at the door, his hand resting on the handle. For a brief moment, something unreadable crossed his face. Something old, something buried. Because I understand patience, he replied. And then he was gone. That night, Madame Gold slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. In her mind, the problem was solved. She had found a man quiet enough to control, disciplined enough to endure, invisible enough to manage. But in another part of the city, the calm man sat alone in a modest room. He removed his jacket carefully, folding it with precision, as if order gave him comfort. On the table lay a worn photograph, its edges soft from time. A younger version of himself stood beside an older man, both smiling at a life that no longer existed. He picked it up slowly. The door has finally opened. His expression remained calm, but his heart moved with purpose. He was not walking into a marriage. He was stepping into a memory that had never stopped breathing. And while Madame Gold believed she had bought peace, she had unknowingly invited the past into her home. Quiet, patient, and awake. The city had never seen a wedding like this. Streets were decorated with flowing fabric and lights that shimmered like stars brought down to earth. Music echoed from every corner, and people gathered not just to celebrate love, but to witness power on display. This was not a union, it was a spectacle. Princess arrived draped in gold and silk, her smile wide and confident. Cameras followed her every step, capturing a bride who looked victorious rather than vulnerable. Beside her stood the groom, calm and composed, dressed with quiet elegance. He smiled when expected, bowed when required, but his eyes told a different story, one heavy with thought, not joy. Applause rose like waves as they entered the hall. Guests whispered behind painted smiles. Look at the wealth. Look at the connections. Look at the luck. Madame Gold sat proudly at the front, her posture straight, her expression satisfied. She accepted the compliments like a queen receiving tribute. In her mind, the whispers had been silenced. The problem had been dressed in white and presented as success. Yet not everyone clapped with ease. The elders sat quietly, hands folded, eyes sharp. They had lived long enough to know when celebration felt forced. They noticed the groom's stillness, the way he observed the room instead of soaking in praise. They noticed how Princess laughed too loudly, as if trying to convince herself. One elder leaned toward another and whispered, "This joy is wearing a mask." The ceremony began, words of blessing floating through the hall. Promises were spoken, rings exchanged, and the crowd cheered. But as the groom placed the ring on Princess's finger, his hand did not tremble, not with excitement, not with fear. It was steady, deliberate. This is not the beginning, he thought. It is the continuation. Princess glanced at him, confused for a moment by his distant gaze. "Smile," she whispered through clenched teeth. He smiled. The crowd applauded again. Outside, fireworks lit the sky, their beauty lasting only seconds before fading into smoke. Inside, tables overflowed with food, and laughter filled the air. Envy and admiration danced together among the guests. But beneath the noise, something felt unsettled. Madame Gold raised her glass, eyes shining. She had won. Her daughter was married. Her reputation restored. Her past secured behind closed doors. Or so she believed. One question hung quietly above the celebration, unheard beneath the music. Can applause drown out the truth forever? As the night wore on, the groom stood beside his bride, silent and watchful. This wedding was not built on love, nor on hope, but on secrets layered carefully beneath gold. And secrets, no matter how well dressed, always wait for their moment. Princess entered their new apartment like she owned the world. Her heels clicked on the polished floor, echoing her confidence, her entitlement. She threw her bags on the sofa, tossed her hair back, and expected the quiet obedience she had received from maids, friends, and even strangers. Is this man going to bow too? She wondered, smirking. She tested him almost immediately. "Pour my wine," she ordered sharply, expecting compliance. Chetty remained seated, calm, his expression unreadable. When she raised her voice and gestured more aggressively, he finally stood. But he did not pour, did not beg, did not flinch. Instead, he met her gaze with a firmness that silenced her. Princess's laughter, usually sharp and fearless, faltered. "Don't you understand who you married?" she snapped, irritation flashing in her eyes. Chetty replied softly, controlled, but with authority that felt heavier than any yell. "Princess, I am not your servant." The words struck her like a cold wind. For the first time, she realized she was not in command here. She tried again, using charm, arrogance, and even mockery, but nothing worked. Each time she tested the boundaries. He responded with quiet rules that stripped her privileges without a single raised voice. No late nights without notice. No insults to staff. No public displays of wasteful arrogance. Her protests grew desperate. She slammed doors, threw clothes, even flung a vase across the room. But Chetty did not flinch. He simply reminded her of the rules, his calm authority stronger than her fury. Why does he not fear me? She thought, confusion and frustration mixing in a bitter taste. Gradually, Princess began to notice the change within herself. Anger no longer burned as brightly. Pride no longer protected her. Fear crept quietly, soft but relentless. She saw that her usual tools, the power of money, the weapons of entitlement, were useless here. The man she thought she could control was unshakable. At night, she sat alone in her room, the silence of the apartment pressing against her chest. She reflected on how she had treated others, the meanness disguised as superiority. I never feared consequences before, she admitted to herself. And now I feel them for the first time. Chetty, standing at the edge of the room, watched her with measured eyes. His mission had begun with revenge aimed at her mother, but he now saw the childlike arrogance in Princess being tempered by understanding and fear. He did not celebrate her discomfort. He observed, patient, knowing that true lessons cannot be forced, only realized. The house, once a playground for spoiled power, now became a place of reflection and restraint. Slowly, Princess's laughter softened. Her gestures became careful, and even her voice, once sharp with command, became quieter, thoughtful. She learned the hard truth, that privilege and arrogance might command attention, but respect and obedience come only to those who earn it, or demand it with silent strength. The celebration had reached its peak. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter floated over the grand hall, and every corner gleamed with gold and silk. Princess twirled in her dress, her arrogance renewed by the applause. But then, the doors opened with a solemn weight that silenced even the orchestra. An elderly man entered, his cane tapping against the marble floor, each sound echoing like a drumbeat of truth. Every eye turned toward him. Whispered questions filled the room. Who is he? What is he doing here? He lifted his hand for silence, and the hall obeyed. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice steady but piercing. You celebrate a marriage built on lies, but the truth always finds its way. The crowd shifted uneasily. Princess's mother straightened in her seat, a flicker of fear breaking through her composed exterior. The elderly man pointed slowly toward Chetty. This man you welcomed as a husband is not merely a stranger. He is the son of a family you wronged years ago. And you, madam, he said, his gaze piercing her, carried the crime in silence, believing wealth could erase it. Gasps erupted. Guests leaned forward, eyes wide. Princess froze mid-laugh, the sparkle in her eyes dimming as comprehension dawned. How could this happen here, in my perfect world? She thought, panic rising like a tide. Chetty's calmness had returned, but it was different now, sharper, heavier, as if the truth had been the final piece of a puzzle. He did not speak, but his eyes, steady and unwavering, told a story of pain, patience, and hidden strength. Princess's mother tried to intervene, her voice trembling. It's a mistake. You don't understand. But no one listened. The words fell flat, powerless against the weight of revelation. Guests whispered, and a few began to step back, realizing the empire of arrogance and money could not shield its secrets forever. The elderly man continued, voice rising only slightly, enough to echo in the hearts of all present. You thought buying peace could erase the past, but the past walks into the mansion, uninvited, and demands justice. Princess looked at Chetty, understanding now. The man she had tried to control, the quiet presence she had underestimated. He was not her husband in name alone. He was the living memory of wrongs unatoned, a mirror reflecting the cruelty her family had hidden beneath luxury and laughter. Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time, she felt fear not born of rules, but of truth. We cannot outrun what we've done, she admitted silently, shame pressing against her chest. The room, once filled with applause and envy, now held only stillness. Silence was heavier than any music. Every mask had fallen. The celebration had transformed into reckoning. The mansion that once echoed with laughter and clinking glasses now felt fragile, as if every wall had begun to tremble under an invisible weight. Chetty moved quietly, deliberately, through the corridors of power that Princess's mother had built with her wealth. No shouting, no confrontation. Only a calm, unyielding presence that seemed to rearrange everything without a single raised voice. He began by uncovering documents long hidden, contracts signed in haste, and promises buried beneath ink and paper. Each page he revealed carried truth. Truth that whispered of deception, greed, and the small cruelties masked by luxury. Princess's mother read them first, her hands shaking, eyes darting, realizing that the foundations she believed unshakable were crumbling silently, piece by piece. Chetty called witnesses, one by one, people who had suffered quietly in the shadows of her power. They did not shout. They did not demand vengeance. They simply told their stories, laying bare the consequences of a lifetime of arrogance and control. Each account was a thread unraveling the tapestry she had so carefully woven. Princess watched, her heart heavy and confused. Why does he not scream? Why does he not strike back? She wondered aloud, unable to understand this calm assault of justice. But as she observed, she felt the weight of shame pressing down. Not on Chetty, but on herself. In the evenings, she caught glimpses of him moving through her mother's offices, quietly reorganizing, exposing, restoring what had been stolen by deceit. The mansion that once celebrated extravagance now held whispered meetings, tense conversations, and the silent acknowledgement that money could no longer command obedience. Even the servants began to notice. Doors that had once closed behind them in fear now opened with cautious curiosity. People whispered not about the wealth in the rooms, but about the power of truth that moved through the house like a gentle, unstoppable tide. Princess's mother could do nothing. She tried bribes, threats, and promises, but Chetty's calm persistence left no space for manipulation. Each attempt at control only strengthened the consequences already in motion. He did not need violence. He needed only patience, logic, and the unwavering truth to do what her money and pride could not. By the time the city took notice, it was already too late. Her empire, built on secrets and silence, was dismantled not with fire or rage, but with clarity and justice. Princess looked at Chetty, understanding finally the depth of his quiet strength. Power is not always in force. Sometimes, it is in persistence and truth, she thought, feeling the lesson settle in her heart. The grand halls of the mansion felt emptier now, the echoes of laughter and entitlement replaced by silence and reflection. Princess walked slowly through the rooms she had once ruled with arrogance, seeing not the luxury she had taken for granted, but the walls that had witnessed her cruelty. Each ornate painting, each gilded frame, seemed to ask a question she had long avoided. Who have I become? She paused before a mirror, staring into eyes that once sparkled with pride and mischief, now clouded with guilt. Memories flashed unbidden, mocking the servants, humiliating her teachers, turning kindness into ridicule. Was I ever truly happy, or only drunk on power and vanity? She asked herself, voice barely a whisper. Tears came slowly, hesitantly, as she remembered those she had hurt most. She approached the people she had scorned, bowing her head in shame, her voice shaking with sincerity. I am sorry, she said, each word heavy with remorse. Apologies that had once seemed unnecessary now felt like the only bridge to the humanity she had ignored. Even her mother's presence no longer intimidated her. With the empire collapsing around them, Princess saw the woman not as a figure of power, but as a flawed human being. The arrogance that had once defined them both was stripped away, leaving vulnerability, fear, and the rawness of truth. Chetty watched quietly from the background, his calm eyes reflecting a silent understanding. He offered no judgment, only a presence that encouraged change without force. Princess realized that humility was not a punishment. It was a choice, a gift she could give herself by acknowledging her mistakes and learning from them. In the following days, she began small acts of kindness. She helped where she had once hindered, listened where she had once mocked, and learned the weight of responsibility that money alone could never carry. I never knew strength could be gentle, or that power could come from compassion, she thought, feeling the lesson settle deep within her heart. Friends and former victims watched cautiously as Princess's transformation unfolded, their skepticism slowly giving way to hope. She did not seek applause, nor forgiveness from all, only the quiet understanding that growth comes from facing one's own darkness and choosing light. The mansion no longer felt like a prison or a stage. It became a home of lessons learned, of respect earned, and of humility embraced. Princess finally understood the depth of pain, the cost of cruelty, and the beauty of change. The grand mansion felt different now, stripped of its former noise and pomp. The corridors that once echoed with commands, laughter, and entitlement were quiet, filled only with the soft, hesitant steps of people unsure of what came next. Princess's mother sat alone in the drawing room, her head bowed, the weight of confession heavy on her shoulders. I must speak the truth, she whispered, voice trembling. All these years, I tried to control, to hide, but the pain I caused cannot be erased by wealth or fear. Her eyes glistened with tears as she recounted her long-buried misdeeds, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and relief. Perhaps honesty is heavier than silence, but lighter than living a lie, she thought, the words settling like dust in the quiet room. The household listened in stunned silence, the grandeur of their lives now eclipsed by the raw, human cost of deception. Restitution began in small, deliberate ways. Reparations to those wronged, apologies to friends and strangers alike, and steps to dismantle the corrupt power structures the mother had built. Power had vanished, replaced by accountability, humility, and an uncertain future. Princess watched her mother, understanding the depth of both guilt and courage it took to admit the truth. She realized that change could not be demanded, it had to be chosen. Slowly, she approached, placing a gentle hand on her mother's shoulder. "It's not too late to do what's right," she said softly, a flicker of hope in her voice. Chetty, the husband, stood nearby, silent and contemplative. His calm presence had been a guiding force throughout, and now the choice rested with him. Could he forgive? Could he stay? Or would he leave, knowing the past had caused pain too deep to ignore? Is justice simply a path? Or is it a journey with no map? He wondered, heart heavy with both anger and empathy. The silence that followed was not empty. It was reflective. Each person felt the weight of actions, the fragility of relationships, and the difficult beauty of truth. There were no easy resolutions, no immediate happiness. But in the quiet, there was a promise that from honesty and accountability, something real could begin to grow. The mansion, once a symbol of unchecked wealth and control, now stood as a testament to lessons learned, mistakes faced, and the long, uncertain path of healing. And though the future remained unclear, the first steps toward redemption had been taken, fragile but undeniable.